A daycare worker out in Illinois has been charged after allegedly putting a 4-year-old child in a garbage can as a form of punishment. And that's not even the worst part. She's also accused of leaving him outside in freezing temperatures. We have another disturbing case of alleged child endangerment we want to shed a light on. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Imagine dropping your child off to daycare one morning to find out that one of the workers is now suspected of leaving him outside in the freezing cold and then putting him in a trash can. Oh, and your child is 4 years old. Yeah, those are the allegations now surrounding Learning Lab Daycare out of Homewood, Illinois. And now one of those workers, 58-year-old Anna Petrou, has been criminally charged. So we go back to January 13th of this month, and according to police, Petrou allegedly took a 4-year-old child, placed them in an alley outside of the daycare for about 20 seconds. Now, that may not sound like a long time, but here's the kicker. The temperature that day was a bone-chilling 19 degrees Fahrenheit. We're talking serious risk of hypothermia and frostbite for this small child. But then you take those allegations from law enforcement, you take them as true. That apparently wasn't enough of a punishment for Petrou. Why? Because after bringing the child back inside, she then allegedly placed the 4-year-old in an empty garbage can, a trash can. Oh, and according to ABC7, what did the child do wrong to warrant this kind of punishment? Well, reportedly, refused to take a nap. Yeah, not that anything would justify this, but again, assuming this is all true, wow. Now, you might be wondering how on earth something like this could happen at a licensed daycare facility. That's a great question, and we're going to get into that. And also whether anyone else, there were other witnesses that might have saw this and just didn't get involved. We'll get into that too. But the child's parents are understandably shocked. They are outraged. They say they only found out about this incident when they picked up their son later that day, and he casually mentioned that a worker had put him in a garbage can for not wanting to nap. Can you imagine hearing that from your 4-year-old child? How angry would you be? And what's even more disturbing is that there's apparently video evidence of this incident. The daycare had security cameras that apparently capture Petrou picking up the child, placing him in the garbage can, and this footage will likely play a crucial role in a case against her. So not only was she fired, but she's currently been charged with child endangerment. Now that is a misdemeanor, meaning no more than a year in jail as the maximum punishment. We're going to get into that too, but Petrou has been released pending a future court date. However, the fallout from this incident is far from over. The child's parents are rightfully concerned about potential psychological damage that their son may have suffered from this humiliation. They're also considering a civil lawsuit against the daycare. Oh, and the defense, I forgot to mention this. Well, maybe not technically a legal defense in the future, but you want to hear what Petrou reportedly told the parents? That this was all a joke. All right, so I want to bring on attorney Russell Button of the Button Law Firm, who has a focus on daycare injuries and abuse. Russell, thanks so much for coming on. Overall thoughts on this case before we get into the specifics of it?
Thanks for having us, Jesse. I'll tell you, when we first got wind of this, the immediate thing that came to my mind was this is a heartbreaking example of abuse and neglect. I mean, we're talking about traumatizing a 4-year-old child because he didn't want a nap. Now, while most of the news story and news reporting on this is focused on the caregiver who did this to the child, there are so many layers of negligence here that it is clear that this is a systemic pattern of a daycare hiring unqualified caregivers. And as the media has reported, it's not just this caregiver and what she did that came to light. Investigations into this incident have revealed that at least one other caregiver failed to intervene and report what this other caregiver was doing, which leads to a next layer, right? And when we started to look a little bit further, a daycare here not taking the time to train its caregivers on appropriate discipline and how to handle children. Again, not wanting to take a nap, then throwing them outside into 19-degree weather, and putting them in a trash can and trying to call it a joke. That is not proper at all in any way, shape, or form.
You mentioned the word systemic for a second. Obviously, this is not the first case that you and I have talked about. This is not the first case that you've covered. Is there a larger issue at play before we get into the specifics of this? Is it understaffing? Is it financial budget cuts? Is it something that these daycares are not getting that they should be getting? Why do we see this happening?
Yeah, this is bigger. I mean, all of these cases, all of the daycare injury cases that we handle all throughout the country, and here in our home state of Texas, they are all systematic issues. They're from top down, and that's what I was getting at with. It's not just that there was an unqualified caregiver here or caregivers for failing to intervene. You've got a daycare that clearly wasn't training their employees, their caregivers. And then most importantly, they're not supervising them throughout the day. Had they been supervising them, they would have seen this type of behavior of a caregiver throwing a kid outside, putting them in a trash can. And had this daycare actually been watching the surveillance cameras, they had them. They weren't even watching them or monitoring them to comply with the state laws on supervision for keeping the kids and the caregiver safe. So yes, this is a bigger problem. This is a systemic problem. And it usually, in our experience, these aren't isolated instances. And all of this leads to, like what you were alluding to, what is sort of one of the big culprits? What's the root cause? When you've got businesses trying to make decisions, ultimately it boils down to profits over children. And that's ultimately what it comes down to in these cases.
By the way, as you know, we talk about some pretty scary stuff here on Sidebar, and we always try to partner up with companies that can maybe add some protection to your life. I mean, did you know that your personal data is being harvested and sold online by data brokers? Yeah, anyone can buy your personal details. And when that happens, you're at risk for a whole host of things: identity theft, becoming a target of phishing scams, potentially stalking. But that is why I'm so happy to tell you about our sponsor, Delete Me. So Delete Me helps you keep your personal information private. They found dozens of data brokers with my personal information posted on so many listings, but Delete Me helped remove it, and they will keep monitoring the sites for you so your information doesn't find its way back on there after the first removal. And honestly, using Delete Me has given me peace of mind about my family too, because if someone buys your data via a data broker, they can see information about your relatives too. So right now you can get 20% off of Delete Me and protect your personal data when you go to joindeleteme.com/sidebar, but make sure to use promo code sidebar at checkout. So you believe that this could amount to a lawsuit? Should we be on the lookout for something like this? And if it is, who do you end up suing, and what are the claims that we should be looking at?
Absolutely. Could this be a civil lawsuit? The answer is yes. What civil lawsuits have a unique opportunity to do is to do a deeper dive into what the daycare knew or did not want to know, and what they chose to do or neglected to do, right? And so it holds them accountable for their systematic issues, because we know, again, that appears to be an isolated event or a pattern of neglect and abuse with one caregiver, what those end up coming from is the bigger picture. And if it's happening there, what else is failing at this daycare? And how long has this been going on? So that's one side of the civil claims that has a unique opportunity in those civil lawsuits that's far different from the criminal case.
And by the way, you're saying potentially. I'm just, I'm thinking about theoretically here. A class action suit, so other parents who dropped off their kids there may go after this daycare, because again, was this just an isolated incident? Or if you think about it, like from their perspective, the parents' perspective, right? They had apparently been using this daycare for quite some time, and maybe are wondering if there's other occasions where something like this could happen. You wonder if other parents might have had similar circumstances, and you look at the footage. But talk to me about, do you mean just a specific lawsuit with respect to these parents, or could it be larger?
Well, first off, it would be what we know here today. It would be a lawsuit with just these parents for what happened to their child,
Sure.
Right? But again, are these things only happening to that child? That's just the information that's come to light so far. We've got other cases, and we've been handling cases where when they start to look into what happened to one child and one family, they realize that other children were being affected. So in situations like this, when something becomes, publicly known, any other parent who has their kids at this daycare, they need to ask themselves the questions: hey, did I miss anything? Is there anything that may have been going on with my child? And hopefully the state investigations can reveal that information And if so, and if something happened to any other child, then yes, there would be more than one civil lawsuit that could be brought by any child that was significantly impacted at this daycare by that caregiver or by any other ones.
And what are we talking about in terms of the actual causes of action, the actual claims, and what would the damages be here? Does it matter how much, this had an effect on this individual child, or is it this the fact that this, assuming this is true, right? This is all allegations, but assuming this is true, is it just the fact that this was done that in and of itself proves damages?
Well, we know from doing these daycare cases for years that when children at the age of 4, and quite frankly, anywhere in that early developmental stage, are being subjected to abuse and neglect, especially to this extent, it's going to have a profound impact on them. And what we know and what we've seen and what we expect to be happening with this child and this family is that this child is definitely probably had a regression, took steps back in his development in various ways, and is going to have a long road to recovery psychologically and emotionally. Being able to trust adults again, being able to understand proper discipline methods, being able to take direction from a caregiver, or even be in a social setting like this. We've seen a whole litany of damages associated with abuse and neglect cases that we fully expect to be here. So with what we know here, I expect that the damage model is significant here for this family.
And now I want to talk a little bit more about the criminal case for a second. I want to focus on Petrou. People would look at this and say a misdemeanor charge that feels highly inadequate. Do you think these charges could be upgraded?
Yes, potentially. In every criminal case, at the end of the day, it's up to the local police department and the district attorney's office to determine what charges they can bring. But in our experience of fighting for families against negligent daycare centers, we often find that in these extremely cruel incidents against children, that they're not one-time incidents. And so when the police and the state investigators, they start watching the footage, and they know to go back and watch as much surveillance footage as is possible, that they can identify other incidents of wrongdoing, either against this particular caregiver or others, and uncover the systemic issues at these bad daycare centers. So have we seen charges get upgraded or additional charges being provided to other individuals associated with this? Absolutely. And we hope that further investigation continues here so that all that were responsible here are held accountable criminally and civilly.
What do you make of the surveillance footage in the sense that, does it look like a pretty cut and dry case, whether you talk about a criminal charge or a civil case? Or do you say, look, of course she knew the cameras were there. How could she not? And would she really do something wrong knowing the cameras are there? Maybe it was just a joke, although I don't think that really flies legally. It seems to me that surveillance cameras, it makes this a case where there's not much wiggle room.
Yeah, there is no excuse for this caregiver's actions, plain and simple. Now, whether she felt she was joking or not, placing a child in a garbage can when it's below freezing, making them stay inside of that trash can is no laughing matter. And for any adult, any caregiver, anyone that works in a child care setting that's supposed to be professionally keeping your kids safe and helping love and develop them, this is not a joke. And anyone that watches this knows that it's not a joke. So that was just simply an out and trying to make an excuse by that caregiver. And anyone that backs that up for the daycare is just flat wrong. This video is crystal clear. The surveillance cameras at daycare centers, they're there to give the families peace of mind. They're also there for the daycare to be able to supervise what's going on. So what happened here on this camera doesn't lie. There's no excuse for it, and it is definitely not a joke.
Is this the kind of case that goes to trial, or is this the kind of case that she takes a deal?
Honestly, based on the evidence, it's hard to refute the surveillance footage. You would want to think that this is the kind of case that both her and the daycare would want to settle in order to avoid all the bad facts getting out there, own up to it, take accountability for it. And same thing with the criminal. That's up to her and her legal team. But to take this forward, while you never know what happens, I can't imagine that somebody would want to try this. But we have seen stranger things happen before in these criminal cases associated with daycare and child injury crimes.
And when do we think about this, right? So according to ABC7, this was reported to police before 9 p.m. that night. Talk to us about how important it is to report this immediately, right? Because if you wait, could that hurt your legal claim? And by the way, if this child didn't tell his parents, would they have ever known?
That's the shocking thing, Jesse, is, these daycares a lot of times, they just kind of stick their head in the sand and they hope that the children are never going to say anything, and or the parents aren't going to do anything, and they don't report it. And so what we always tell parents and what we educate them on is this. Anytime you hear about something happening at the daycare that sets off a red flag, you should definitely start to ask questions, and you should look to report it to the state. If there are serious injuries and abuse and neglect happening, you absolutely should, and report it to the proper authorities like the police. Because many times in these daycare cases, when egregious things happen, they rarely own up to it. They either try to ignore it and hope that nobody says anything, or they try to cover it up and try to put things in place to cover it up. This one just wanted to try to ignore it and hope that the kid never said anything. Thankfully, the child did, and the parents were thoughtful enough to act on that, and carry that forward. And now here we are with this investigation and all this coming to light. And honestly, that child and that family, they saved other kids, and they're going to hopefully prevent this from happening to other children. So reporting any action by the daycare should be a number one priority. When they see something, when they hear about something, they should immediately report it to the proper authorities so that it gets investigated, and anyone and any failure that happened gets held accountable and gets brought to light.
100%. And it's going to be interesting because I want to read you a statement in a minute. But again, I think this reinforces the idea of that open communication that you hope parents have with their children, where children feel comfortable telling their parents about something that happens. Because again, you have to imagine they may have never known. Now, you talked about a statement here. You talked about reactions. So there is a statement from Learning Lab, and I want to read it to you. It says, "We tried to work cooperatively and transparently with the family. We are working with our licensing agency, DCFS, and the Homewood Police. We have shared additional information we became aware of yesterday because we believe it warranted further investigation and possible action against the person who did this. We have also fired a second employee who failed to intervene." Russell, few things here. A, the idea that they've taken action against somebody else who they believe failed to intervene. When they say they tried to work cooperatively and transparently with the family, what does that mean? And now that they're working with DCFS, what can we expect? So I know three things from that statement.
Well, legally, they're obligated to cooperate with state officials and the authorities. So the fact of that being something to, reward or be proud of, is a baseline minimum. Obstructing justice should never be done, and it shouldn't be rewarded and appreciated that they're cooperating with DCFS and the police investigations here. That's just first and foremost. So the fact that that's even called to light, it begs a different question. Why would you say tried? And whenever we hear and we see statements like this, and we tried to cooperate, we tried to look further at these types of things, what happened before all of this that allowed it to get to this place? And why would try even be in the equation? So when I look at this statement, here's what I see from being involved in these types of cases. I'm glad that the daycare is now working with the authorities, but it's just frustrating that it had to get to this point. Child care laws are so comprehensive and aimed at preventing any incidents of harm or injuries to little ones. The daycare's director, management, and owners, they should have complied with all these safety measures from the start. Because had they done that, this was 100% preventable. This caregiver shouldn't have been in that room with those children. This should have never happened to this specific family. And anything else that comes out in this investigation should have been caught earlier, should have been directly brought to the attention of the parents. And there should have been open and transparent communication along the way, not just when it finally got to the authorities and they started investigating it.
Yeah, you talk about a further investigation, a lawsuit. This family has been using Learning Labs reportedly for 2 years. They're not going back. So again, it does become a question what was going on in those last 2 years. By the way, how does it work with background checks on these daycare workers? And even if you do a background check, assuming these allegations are true, you can't always predict that these kind of things are going to happen.
Well, there's a couple of things with background checks. So a lot of people, when they think about background checks, does the daycare require to do a background check on caregivers? The answer to that is yes. But what a background check is going to reveal needs to be a little bit more thorough. And what we see on our cases is many times daycares don't even require an application. And they don't even require them to put who they were working for before. They don't have a requirement that they had any prior caregiver experience or that they are interested in the caregiver arena, let alone. And on these, many times they're not even required to put references and doing reference checks. And so in some of these cases, when we get into the discovery, we're learning, they say, oh, we did a background check. They cleared, the state sent us a letter and said everything is good. Well, that's great. I mean, that's the bare bones minimum, but the state's not actually interviewing this candidate. The state's not actually taking a look at their resume and experience. They're just doing a straight criminal check. That's it from what the background check is revealing. We see in these cases that we have caregivers that are hired that have previously been burnt out at other daycare facilities, and they lie about having cancer, and instead they actually have severe anxiety related to being burned out by other prior care experience. That's alarming. We have other ones where the reference checks, had they actually called them, all the reference checks would have said this individual is not safe to be around kids.
Wow.
We have other ones where when we actually subpoenaed the prior employer records, that it shows that there is a pattern and a history of bad behavior or something that would have alarmed and alerted a red flag, right? And then also what you got to remember is a lot of these caregivers that are coming into daycares now are younger, right? And so when you're not asking about what did you do earlier, because juvenile records aren't going to show up on a background check. And so what happened between 14 and 18, we've seen many cases where that doesn't show up on a background check, but they have DUIs, they have assaults on their record and different things that they should never be around kids. So when I hear that from people that said, well, we did the basic background check, we asked the questions that, the state requires, is that enough? Is that enough? And the answer to that is always no. You need to do more. You need to make sure that this individual that you hired is actually qualified to keep kids safe and to love and care and develop them and be proud of what they do. If that isn't the standard that's being met when people are being hired at these daycares, then don't hire them and be honest with the parents about it. But then you've got to train them and supervise them. So starting point is qualification. That's the baseline. But then you've actually got to make sure that this person adds up along the way.
No, it's 100% well said. Because again, you're not getting a job as an office clerk. You're getting a job taking care of young children. And I don't know what's more important than that. And let me just leave it on this point. So according to ABC7, the boy's father, Justin Barnes, said that he and the boy's mother, Monica Forte, they, quote, just want to make sure that their son is aware that the situation, what she did was wrong, that he did nothing wrong. Just worse than I could imagine. I'm worried about what he feels. And then I want to read you this. This is from the boy's mother, again, Miss Forte, told ABC7, I had no words, especially when I reviewed the tape. And my first thing was, of course, I'm crying. And I went to the police station. And you work with kids. You have to know how to de-escalate the situation. You don't put them in a garbage can if they don't want to take a nap. So our best wishes to the family, because this is a really, really difficult situation. Russell Button, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And again, thank you for the work that you do in trying to hold those facilities accountable that engage in wrongdoing.
Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate your time, and our heart goes out to the family that was impacted by this.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.